Today, I'm going to be talking about Vitex, how it works, and how to know if it's a good fit for you. So feel free to say hi if you're watching live. If you're watching the replay, you can put hashtag replay in the comments, or feel free to ask any questions or tell me about your experience with Vitex if you've tried it. So today I wanted to do this as a presentation because there's so much detailed information to go into. So I'm going to share my screen here. And so today we're talking about Vitex. And Vitex agnus castus is also known as chasteberry or a chaste tree berry. And the fruit is what is used medicinally. It's touted as a progesterone booster and cycle regulator. Before we get into how Vitex works, I want to do a quick review of what the hormones do throughout the cycle. So cycle day 1 starts with the first day of your period or the first day of full flow of bleeding. And at this point in the cycle, your hormones should all be low. And then throughout the early part of your cycle, during the follicular phase, your brain is sending, your pituitary gland in your brain is sending follicle stimulating hormone to the ovaries and stimulating the follicles to grow. As the follicle grows, then these follicles are producing estrogen. And then when that estrogen reaches a high enough point, that tells the LH or the luteinizing hormone to rise. Once the luteinizing hormone has reached its peak, and this is when the follicle is signaled to release the egg at ovulation. And then the luteinizing hormone also begins the luteinization process of the remaining follicle, which turns into corpus luteum, which is then the gland in the ovary that produces progesterone throughout the luteal phase. So that's the basics of the hormones throughout the cycle. What does that look like in PCOS? So PCOS involves a lot of hormonal imbalances, right? There are a lot of things that can go wrong that delays or prevents ovulation and leads to very long cycles. Some of the hormones that might be high are LH or luteinizing hormone, prolactin, androgens, specifically testosterone is known of, but there are other androgens, and some can be high while others are low or normal. Estrogen can be high and insulin can be high, and all of these things can have an impact on ovulation. And then some hormones that can be low with PCOS are progesterone and again estrogen. And estrogen and LH in particular throughout the follicular phase of the cycle can fluctuate up and down. And this fluctuation can prevent ovulation and cause problems with ovulation. So what does that look like on this graph? That would look like the estrogen could be fluctuating up and down. The LH may be fluctuating up and down. And if it's peaking, your body might be trying to ovulate, but if the follicles haven't developed properly, then the ovulation may fail. So that's kind of what the hormones might look like in PCOS, and it's different from person to person. Some people might have perfectly normal LH levels or perfectly normal estrogen levels. It's really different from person to person, but typically speaking, these are the hormones that you may see out of balance. And I want to look specifically at prolactin because this has a lot to do with Vitex and how it works. So prolactin is a pituitary hormone, just like LH and FSH, and it's produced during pregnancy and after birth to stimulate the production of the milk glands in the breasts and to produce milk. In breastfeeding, the stimulation of the suckling on the nipple signals the body to keep producing prolactin. So prolactin's main purpose is for pregnancy and birth and nourishing the baby. But prolactin can also be high even when there's no pregnancy or breastfeeding going on. Prolactin suppresses ovulation as long as it remains high to avoid a second pregnancy after birth, and when the body needs time to recover from the birth, and when breastfeeding is important to grow the baby. So as you're breastfeeding, and that stimulates the production of prolactin, and that's what prolactin's purpose is. But like I said, prolactin can be high in people who are not pregnant or breastfeeding. And particularly in PCOS, it's been found to be very common to be high. So, and the reason for that isn't really known. There's speculation that it might be because of the consistently high estrogen levels that are common in PCOS. And again, not everybody with PCOS has these issues, but it is pretty common. So how does Vitex impact the hormones? The research is mixed, but most studies show that Vitex lowers prolactin levels and in so doing raises LH to promote ovulation. So since prolactin suppresses the other pituitary hormones to prevent ovulation, if your prolactin is high when you're not pregnant or breastfeeding, then your LH is the Vitex then lowers the prolactin and raises the LH and promotes natural ovulation. So the natural active ovulation is what then produces the progesterone. And we kind of looked at what that looks like on the graph. And some experts believe that Vitex may boost progesterone in other ways, but there is very little, if any, evidence of this in the research, and the mechanism of it isn't known. So what we know based on the research is that Vitex mainly works on lowering the prolactin and raising LH levels to promote natural ovulation, and then that produces the progesterone. So it doesn't necessarily help progesterone directly. But is this hormonal cascade good for PCOS? We've already looked at what some of the hormones are doing and what hormones may be high. Is Vitex a good fit? How do you know if Vitex is a good fit for you? So there's some things that you need to ask and to evaluate. First of all, do you have high prolactin? So usually it's best to get testing done first to know. And this is particularly if you're having long cycles or delayed ovulations. If you have regular cycles, then prolactin may not be so much of an issue with you unless your ovulation is delayed. But when you get testing done, if the result is between 10 and 20 nanograms per milliliter, that is considered moderately high. Over 20 is considered high, and then over 100 is very high and might indicate a hyperprolactinemia, which is a prolactin-producing tumor on the pituitary gland, which can be diagnosed by MRI and then treated with medication or surgery, depending on the situation. And then the other thing you have to ask when you have PCOS and are considering using Vitex is, do you have high LH? So anything over 7 international units per liter is considered high. And high LH is very common with PCOS. So the question is, if you do not have high prolactin, is Vitex actually going to help you? If that's how it works, if it lowers prolactin, and that's how it helps support the cycle, but you don't have high prolactin, is it actually going to help you? And we don't really know if Vitex can lower normal prolactin levels. It could potentially lead to more imbalances. And then if you already have high LH because you have PCOS, then Vitex could make that worse. It could potentially delay ovulation, especially if it's raising those LH levels that are already high. It could be making things worse. So you kind of have to look at the whole picture. Ideally, get some testing done first to find out what your personal picture is and whether or not Vitex might help you. And this kind of differs from person to person. I know I've heard of people taking Vitex with PCOS and not having any issues with it, but they didn't necessarily know what their hormones were doing beforehand. So here are my recommendations. If you're considering taking Vitex because you suspect or know that you have low progesterone levels, then consider finding ways to boost progesterone naturally without Vitex. And a lot of this comes down to supporting a healthy ovulation and healthy hormones in the follicular phase that may be suppressing ovulation and leading to a deficient corpus luteum. So we went through that graph that showed what hormones are doing throughout the follicular phase. Finding ways to support healthy levels of those hormones should support a healthy ovulation and a healthy corpus luteum to produce those progesterone levels. And if your prolactin is high, then consider boosting dopamine naturally. I didn't really get into this when talking about how Vitex works, but the way that it lowers prolactin is by raising dopamine levels. So the dopamine is what keeps the prolactin at a healthy level. And some experts suspect that low dopamine can lead to high prolactin. So consider raising dopamine levels. And how do you do that? Raising dopamine comes down to diet and lifestyle for the most part. So eat lots of protein, get good exercise, get good sleep, manage your stress, and even get some sunlight. And all of these things can help boost dopamine naturally and progesterone too. And it's also been shown that deficiencies in iron, niacin, folate, and vitamin B6 can lead to low dopamine levels. So you can consider testing those levels as well to see if that may be a factor. And typically these are best to get from food, nutritionally speaking, but a B-complex supplement is mostly harmless. Iron can be a little bit more complicated because your body can't get rid of that as easily if you don't need it and you're supplementing it. So typically that's best from food, and these things can also help with progesterone levels, especially the B vitamins. So those are some things that you can do to support both healthy prolactin levels and healthy progesterone levels through the underlying factors and dopamine. And then lastly, if you choose to take Vitex without testing, and despite everything that I've said, because I know some people are still going to do what they want to do, that's fine. If you decide to do that, my recommendation is to chart your cycles and track your symptoms to see how it's affecting you. So my recommendation is to chart some of your cycles before starting the Vitex so that you know what is normal for you, what a normal typical cycle looks like for you. And then when you start taking the Vitex, to chart that, put that on your chart, and to see what changes. See if it helps things, see if it hurts things. You'll be able to see pretty clearly if it's delaying your ovulation and causing long cycles and making things worse. And you'll be able to, on the flip side of that, you'll be able to see pretty clearly when it's helping things. And then also, my recommendation is to get hormonal testing done. So before trying to take it, check hormones, and then after taking it, check hormones again to see how it's affecting things. That's my ideal of what I would recommend, but I know getting testing done can be a little bit difficult, especially if your doctor doesn't want to do that for you. There is places that you can order testing online. It depends on your location, but that is my recommendation. And then I just wanted to quickly show this chart and show what a cycle chart might look like and how you can track your symptoms and everything. So like on this chart, it's just, I'm not going to go into it super detailed, but you can just see that there's a way to track all of your symptoms. And this isn't the whole thing. You can also track any supplements that you take, and then you can see how things might affect your cycle and what, like on this chart, there's anxiety there, and that starts just before ovulation and continues through the follicular phase. So that's just an example of how you would chart your cycle and track Vitex. So there you have it. that's everything about Vitex. Everything based on the research that I've been able to find over the last like 6 or 7 years that I've researched it. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to put those in the comments and I will respond to you. Thanks for joining me.